The night her father died, Lorelei Ashvane lost everything except the dress she was wearing. That was how it felt, at least. The lawyers came 3 days after the funeral, while the house still smelled of funeral lilies and cold wax. They sat in her father's study, her study, she had thought, and spread papers across the mahogany desk and explained, in the careful voices of men who deliver bad news professionally, that the estate of Ashvane Park, along with its holdings, its income, and its debts, had passed entirely to her cousin Prentice Vane. There was a will, a second will, signed 8 months before her father's death, at a time when he had been ill, and Lorelei believed not entirely himself. She contested it. Of course she did. The solicitor listened. He nodded. He said he understood her position. Then he said there was very little to be done. Prentice arrived on a Tuesday. He was cordial. He called her cousin as he always had, with that particular smile of his that never quite reached his eyes. He said she was welcome to stay through the winter. He said it the way a man says something he does not mean. Lorelei left on Wednesday. She had been 23 years old. She had grown up in that house. She knew which floorboard creaked outside the kitchen, and where her mother had planted roses that still came up every June, and the way the morning light came through the library windows in autumn and made everything look like it was on fire. She left all of it. She did not look back as the carriage pulled away. That was 2 years ago. Now she was 25, and she was walking through the servants' entrance of Ashvane Park with a trunk that wasn't hers, a letter of reference she had written herself on plain paper, and a name that was not the one her father had given her. She had introduced herself as Lena Marsh, a housekeeper's assistant come to fill the vacancy left by the last one. She was, she told herself, here only to find the second will, the original, the one she believed existed. She had a solicitor in London who believed it too, who said that if she could find the document her father had signed before the second, the one she had always known about, the one that left Ashvane to her, then the estate was still hers. But he needed the document itself. A copy would not do. So, Lena Marsh, housekeeper's assistant. She straightened her back and followed Mrs. Gould, the housekeeper, down the corridor she had once run through as a child. It was strange, pretending not to know a house you loved. She did not let herself look too long at anything. What she had not expected was the Duke. Prentice had leased Ashvane Park 2 months into his ownership. Lorelei had known that. Word traveled, even to a woman living quietly in a rented room in Bath. But she had thought the tenant would be someone ordinary, some minor lord wanting a country house for the season. Instead, it was Gideon Maury, the Duke of Mar, 31 years old, returned 6 months ago from 3 years in the Sudan, where he had commanded the Northern Regiment through the last campaign. He had come home to a country that had moved without him, to a family that had dispersed, to a title that still required managing from a man who was no longer certain he knew how to manage anything. He had leased Ashvane Park because it was quiet. That was what Mrs. Gould told her, in the way housekeepers tell new staff things they think are important. He wanted quiet. Lorelei, Lena, saw him first on her 3rd day. He was in the library, her library, standing at the window with his back to the room, a cup of something cooling in his hand, looking out at the grounds. She had come to dust. She had a cloth. She was doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing. But she stopped for a moment in the doorway, because the window he was looking through was the one that faced the rose garden, her mother's rose garden, and the morning light was coming through at that angle she had loved all her life, and for just a second it was unbearable. She made herself step inside. Behold began to work. The Duke did not turn. He said without looking at her, "Leave the desk. I'll be working there." "Yes, Your Grace." She kept her voice flat, plain. She moved to the shelves. He turned then. She felt it without looking, felt his gaze pass over her, the way a man's gaze passes over furniture, noting its presence, nothing more. "You're new," he said. "Yes, Your Grace, 3 days." He looked back out the window. The Pemberton girl left suddenly. "I wouldn't know, Your Grace." He didn't say anything else. Lorelei dusted the shelves she had pulled books from as a girl and tried not to think about it, and mostly succeeded. The house was not the same as it had been. Prentice had changed things. Small things, mostly. Different curtains in the east parlor. A clock moved from the hallway to a room where no one could hear it. The writing desk in the study repositioned to face the wrong wall. But each small change was a small wound, and Lorelei moved through her days collecting them. At night, after her duties were done, she looked, quietly, carefully. She knew where her father kept important documents, or where he had kept them 2 years ago. A locked drawer in the study, a hidden compartment in the back of the library wardrobe that she had discovered at age 11 and never told anyone about. The drawer had been cleared out. The compartment she had not yet been able to check. The library was too often occupied by the Duke. He was in there constantly, morning often, late evenings sometimes, not doing anything particularly important as far as she could tell, reading, mostly, or sitting with papers he didn't seem to be making much progress on. He seemed to use the library the way she always had, as a place to simply be, which she understood completely and found deeply inconvenient. She watched him when she was in the room working. Not watching, exactly, she simply noticed. He was quiet in a way that had weight to it. There are people whose silence is an absence, and people whose silence is a presence. His was the latter. The room felt different when he was in it than when it was empty. He asked her once, about a week into her time at Ashvane, what she was looking for on the upper shelf. She had been trying to see behind a row of volumes she knew had been there since her childhood, to see if the compartment was visible from the other side. "A book, Your Grace," she said. "What book?" She named the first title she could see, Brooks' Field Guide to the English Estate. He looked at her for a moment. "That's a book for land agents." "I find it interesting," she said. He said nothing. She climbed down from the step stool. She could feel him watching her as she went back to work. The household was small. The Duke had brought only 2 of his own staff, his valet, Crane, a thin man of 50 who seemed to think speaking was an extravagance, and his secretary, Mr. Pelford, who was young and serious and constantly overwhelmed. The rest of the staff were prentices, or had been hired by Mrs. Gould. At meals in the servants' hall, Lorelei was quiet. She had learned to be quiet in a way she'd never had to be before. Not the quiet of a woman choosing not to speak, but the quiet of a woman who has to be careful. The two felt very different on the inside. One of the housemaids, a cheerful girl named Daisy, asked her once where she was from. Lorelei said Bath, which was true. She said she had worked for a family called Marsh, which was not true, but was a name she had chosen because it meant nothing to anyone. "You seem like you know this house," Daisy said, not unkindly. "Old houses are all the same," Lorelei said. "His Grace said something similar," Daisy said. "Crane told me. Said the Duke finds old houses easier than people." Lorelei thought about that later, at her small window, looking out at the corner of the rose garden she could see from there. She thought she understood what that meant. She saw him drop something, in the library, 10 days into her time at Ashvane. He had been standing at the desk, going through papers, and a stack of letters slid from the edge and scattered across the floor. He bent to collect them, slowly, like a man whose body still has not entirely forgiven something. She crossed the room without quite deciding to, and crouched on the other side of the pile, gathering pages. They handed them back and forth in silence for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you, Miss Marsh." "Of course, Your Grace." He was looking at her. She could feel it. She kept her eyes on the letters. "Have you always been a housekeeper's assistant?" he asked. It was an ordinary question. The tone of it was not entirely ordinary. "No," she said. "I had a position as a companion before this, to an elderly woman in Bath. She was ready for these questions she had prepared, and before that, "My family," she said. "Nothing of note." He held her gaze for a moment longer, then looked back at the papers in his hand. "The desk needs to face the other wall," he said. "I'm going to have Crane move it." "As you wish, Your Grace." She stood. He turned back to the window. "Miss Marsh," he said without turning around. She stopped. "You're not what I expected from a housekeeper's assistant." She made herself breathe evenly. "I wouldn't know what you expected, Your Grace." A pause. "No," he said. "I don't suppose you would." She left the room. In the corridor, she stood for a moment with her back against the wall and told herself firmly that she needed to find that document quickly and leave. She found the compartment empty. 3 weeks in, the Duke had gone to the village for the afternoon, a rare excursion, and she had slipped into the library, moved aside the appropriate volumes, and found the hidden panel exactly where it had always been. Empty, swept clean. Something had been there. She could see the faint rectangle in the dust. But it was gone. She stood for a long time looking at nothing. Either the document did not exist, or Prentice had already found it, or it was somewhere else. She closed the compartment, replaced the books, sat in the chair nearest the fire, and allowed herself 2 minutes of feeling utterly defeated. Then she stood up, smoothed her apron, and went back to work. He noticed she was troubled. She didn't realize he was noticing until he said something. They were in the library, always the library, somehow. And she was replacing volumes she had already looked behind twice. He was at the newly repositioned desk, which now faced the correct wall, writing something he seemed dissatisfied with. He said, without preamble, "Something is wrong." She looked up. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace. You've been distracted for 3 days." He said it simply. Not a question. The Pemberton girl was always distracted too, but for different reasons. This is different. I'm perfectly well, Your Grace. He looked at her. Those eyes, she had been avoiding thinking about his eyes, because they were the kind that noticed things. Dark, tired, not hard. Something in them had been worn down rather than sharpened. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "I'm not asking." He looked back at his papers. "But this house does something to people, I've noticed. Some houses do." She was silent for a moment. "What does it do to you?" she asked, and immediately thought that was not a thing Lena Marsh should ask. But he didn't seem to find it strange. He was quiet, looking at the letter in his hand. Then, "It makes me feel like I'm waiting for something," he said. "I don't know what. It's been that way since the war. But this house makes it louder." She understood that. She understood it precisely. "I think some places hold things," she said carefully. "Old things. Feelings that got left behind." He looked at her. A second passed. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly it." He began to speak to her after that. Not long conversations. He was not a long conversation kind of man, but occasional exchanges. Brief and real, in a way that the social niceties of the house were not. He asked her once what she thought about a passage in a book he had been reading. He had marked a page and held it out to her across the library as she was leaving, with the manner of a man who had been thinking about something too long and needed another mind in the room. She read the passage. It was about grief and the way time moves differently after a war, how a person can be bodily present in a peaceful place and still living inside a siege somewhere in the past. "It rings true," she said. "Though I've never been to war, loss does the same thing," he said. "I think it's the same mechanism." She handed the book back. "Do you find that the feeling passes?" He took it from her. "I don't know yet," he said, honestly. "I've only been back 6 months," she nodded. She started for the door. Behind her, he said quietly, "Have you lost someone?" She stopped. Her hand was on the doorframe. "Yes," she said. "My father." She did not turn around. "I'm sorry," he said. She went into the corridor. She looked everywhere she could think to look, the study which was harder to access, the drawing room cabinets, the old steward's office, now used for household accounts. She was methodical. She was careful. She found nothing. What she found instead, and had not expected, was the Duke. Not literally. He was not in the steward's office. But she found herself thinking about him when she was trying not to. About the passage he had shown her. About the way he had said, "I've only been back 6 months." As if the word "yet" at the end of his sentence were something he held on to because he needed to. She told herself this was not relevant. It was not relevant. There was a woman in London, she had heard from Daisy, who heard it from Crane, who mentioned it once without elaborating. A woman the Duke had been expected to marry before the war. A Miss Claudia Fenwick, daughter of an earl. Beautiful. Accomplished. She had waited a year. Then she had married someone else. The Duke had returned to a country that had moved without him. Lorelei thought about that. She thought about it more than she should have. She thought about the two of them. Herself and this man. Both living in a house that belonged to neither of them. Both looking for something they couldn't name. She thought it was funny, in the way that things are funny when they are also a little sad. She told herself to focus. He found her in the garden on a Sunday afternoon. She had told Mrs. Gould she needed air and had walked out to the rose garden without quite planning to, and was standing at the edge of it with her arms folded against the November cold, looking at the bare canes her mother had planted 15 years ago. She heard footsteps on the gravel and turned. The Duke. In his coat, no hat, hands in his pockets. He stopped when he saw her. "I didn't know anyone else came out here," he said. "I'm sorry, Your Grace." "I'll go," he said, not sharply, almost absently. He walked over and stood a few feet from her, looking at the roses too. "I come out here because it's the only part of the grounds that doesn't feel like it belongs to the house. The house is heavy. This part is lighter." She understood. It was exactly how she had always felt. Her mother had made this garden a different kind of place. Outside the formalities, outside the inheritance of it. She was standing too close to something true. "Someone cared about these very much," she said carefully. "The way they're laid out. You can tell it was done with intention." "I thought the same thing," he said. "It's why I don't have Tomlin tidy it too aggressively." She almost smiled. Her mother would have been grateful for that. "You seem to know gardens," he said. "A little. My father had one." He looked at her. That look he had. The one that sat with things before moving on. "You speak about him in the past tense," he said. "He died 2 years ago." What happened to the garden? It was not the question she expected. It hit somewhere she hadn't thought to protect. "Someone else has it now," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. "I don't know how they're keeping it." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I'm sorry. That's a particular kind of loss. Losing the place that held someone." She looked at him. He was looking at the roses, his profile, that tired, careful face. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly it." He heard the echo of his own words come back to him. She saw his expression shift, only slightly, before he looked away. The letter from her solicitor arrived on a Tuesday, addressed to Lena Marsh, care of the inn in the village where she had arranged her correspondence. The innkeeper's boy brought it up to the house as she had arranged. The solicitor had found something. Not the document itself, but a clerk. An old clerk who had worked for her father's previous solicitor and who remembered witnessing a will. Not the second one, the first one. He remembered it. He would testify to it. But the document itself still mattered. A witness was useful. The document was necessary. She stood in the cold corridor outside the servants' hall and read the letter twice. Then she folded it into her apron pocket and went back to work. She needed more time, and she was running out of reasons to stay that would not seem strange. She did not mean to tell him. She had been very clear with herself that she would not tell him. What happened was, she was in the library. The Duke was at the desk. It was a Tuesday evening and the rest of the house had gone quiet. She was doing the last check of the room before the night, checking the fire and the window latch, which stuck if you didn't lift it at the right angle. She lifted the latch. The window held. He said, "You knew about the latch." She stilled. "Beg your pardon. The window. You knew to lift it before turning." Mrs. Gould showed the last two girls, and they never got it right. "You went straight to it." She set the latch. Turned around. He was looking at her, not the furniture look. The other one. The one that noticed things. "I must have seen someone do it," she said. "I don't think that's it," he said. Not unkindly, quietly. "I've been thinking about it for some time. You knew where the library wardrobe compartment was. I saw you, the first time you opened it. You went straight to the panel, you didn't search. You knew the study desk was against the wrong wall, because you went a different way around it than the other girls do. You know where everything is because you have known for a long time." The fire crackled. Outside, November wind moved through the old trees. She stood very still. "Who are you?" he asked. Simple, direct. "And please don't tell me Lena Marsh from Bath." A long silence. She said, "Lorelei Ashvane." She heard her own name come out of her mouth and felt something loosen, all through her chest. "My father was Sir Clement Ashvane. This was his house, and before him his father's house, and before that his grandfather's. And 2 years ago, my cousin Prentice produced a will that I believe is not legitimate, and a court that I believe was not impartial, and the house passed to him." She paused. "I'm here because I think the original will is still somewhere in this house. I had a position with Mrs. Gould's predecessor, and when I heard there was a vacancy, I came back." He listened. He did not interrupt. When she was finished, he was silent for a moment. Then he said, "The compartment in the library wardrobe. Empty," she said. "I checked 3 weeks ago. There's another," he said. She stared at him. "I found it by accident. In the first week, I was moving books. There's one behind the north shelf, near the window. I put it back and didn't think more of it." He stood. "I didn't look inside." She followed him across the room. He pulled 3 volumes from the shelf. Not where she would have looked. She had checked those shelves twice and put them on the floor. There was a seam in the paneling. He pressed it. The panel shifted. She reached in. Paper, folded paper, yellowed at the edges, tied with a ribbon she recognized. Her hands were entirely steady. She did not understand why. She unfolded the document. Her father's handwriting, the solicitor's seal, her name. She read it once. Twice. It was real. She sat down on the floor of the library she had grown up in, because her legs seemed to think that was reasonable. She sat with the document in her hands and the firelight moving over the words. She heard the Duke settle into the chair nearest her. Not too close, just near. The way he had begun to be, lately, present without pressing. She didn't say anything for a long time. He didn't ask. "I was always certain it existed," she finally said. "My father told me once, when I was young, where he kept important things. He said this house would be mine. I believed him." Her voice was even. "I don't know how Prentice found the other compartment and not this one." "He may not have known to look," the Duke said. "Not everyone knows a house the way you know this one." She looked up at him. He was watching her with that careful attention of his. Not pity. Something more considered than that. "What will you do?" he said. "I have a solicitor. He has a witness. Now I have this." She folded the document along its original creases. "I'll take it to London." "When?" "Tomorrow." He nodded. Then, after a moment, "It will take some time, I expect. The legal proceedings." "Yes, several months perhaps. Possibly longer." He was quiet. She was still sitting on the floor. She had not moved to stand, and he had not suggested it, and somehow that had been all right. "I'm sorry," he said, "that you had to come back this way." "I'm not entirely," she said, and then stopped herself, because that had come out more truly than she had planned. He looked at her. A second passed. 2 seconds. She made herself stand. She brushed off her apron. She was still holding the document. "You should have the desk moved back." she said. "Before I speak to Mrs. Gould, to the original wall. It faces the garden better." He held her gaze. Something in his expression that was very careful and very deliberate said that he understood she was not only talking about the desk. "Miss Ashvane," he said, "before you go." She stopped. He was standing now. He looked at her across the width of the library. Her library, or nearly again, and he looked like a man deciding something. "I'll still need the house," he said, "for some months, until the lease is resolved, I would imagine." A pause. "If the estate returns to you and you choose to honor the existing arrangement, I would not be a difficult tenant." "No," she said, "I don't think you would be." "And I think," he said more slowly, "that you would not be a difficult landlord." She almost laughed. She hadn't laughed, genuinely, in 2 years. "I might be difficult," she said. "I have opinions about the desk." "I know," he said. "I was going to move it back regardless, and that ridiculous small thing, was the moment that something settled. She felt it. She didn't name it. It was too early to name it, but it settled. She left for London the next morning. The case took 4 months. Her solicitor was methodical. The old clerk gave his testimony and held firm. The document held up to examination. Prentice, who had expected no opposition, found himself facing rather more than he had anticipated, and his own solicitor's performance was less than inspiring. In April, the court found in Lorelei's favor. Ashvane Park was hers. She received the news in a solicitor's office in London, in a chair that was not particularly comfortable, and she sat very still for a moment. And then she thanked the solicitor, and she took the papers he gave her, and she walked out into the spring morning on the street. She stood there for a while. She thought about the rose garden coming up again in June, as it always did. Her mother's roses, tenacious and stupid and cheerful, coming up every year regardless of who owned the ground they were in. She thought about a window latch that stuck if you didn't lift it first. She wrote to the Duke before she returned. A formal letter, short. She was not yet sure what else it could be. She informed him of the outcome and indicated she intended to honor the lease through its agreed term. He wrote back within a week. His handwriting was precise and spare, much like his speech. He said he was glad. He said he hoped the proceedings had not been too arduous. He said the desk was in its correct position. She smiled when she read that. She wrote back. She said she was returning to Ashvane at the end of the month. She said she hoped he had not found the window latch too troublesome. He wrote back. He said the latch was fine. He said, and she read this twice, that the house was easier to be in than he had expected, and that he was not certain what had changed, but something had. She read it standing by her window in the rented room in London, which was almost over, which she would not miss at all. She thought about what he had said in November, in the garden. "I think it's the same mechanism. Loss. War. The way time folds strangely after something large has ended." She thought about the two of them, in that library, the document in her hands, him on the chair beside her, without being asked, just present. She wrote back. She said, "I believe what changed is that the house began to be inhabited by someone who treated it as it deserved to be treated. Some houses can tell the difference." She sealed the letter before she could think better of it. She came back to Ashvane in May. The carriage came up the long drive, and she looked out the window, and the trees were in new leaf, and the house was there, solid and golden-stoned and particular, exactly as it had always been. She went in through the front door. She stood in the front hall for a moment and let herself simply be there. Footsteps in the corridor. She knew them, somehow, already. The Duke came around the corner of the passage from the library and stopped when he saw her. He looked different in May than he had in November. Not changed, exactly. Less weighted. She thought of what he had written. "I am not certain what has changed, but something has." And she thought she could see it. "Miss Ashvane," he said. "Your Grace." She looked at him. "Is the desk still in the right position?" "It is," he said. though I reserve the right to move it occasionally when I'm dissatisfied with what I'm writing. That seems reasonable." He came a few steps closer. He stopped a proper distance away, which was also closer than it needed to be. He looked at her the way he had in November, that way he had of sitting with things before speaking, and then he said, "I'm glad you're back." Simple. His voice made simple things sound like he had thought about them. "I'm glad to be back," she said. Outside, through the hall windows, the rose garden was visible. Just visible, the first green of leaves coming in. She had thought for 2 years that what she wanted was the house, that it was all she wanted. The paper, the legal victory, the restored name. She had the house, and she was standing in the hall looking at this man who had kept her mother's roses and moved the desk back and written her letters about nothing in particular. And she understood that the house, though she loved it entirely, was not the only thing she had come back for. He was looking at her. He understood it too. She could see that he did. "Shall we start again?" he said, not quite a question, properly this time. "We might," she said, "though I should tell you I have no intention of being Lena Marsh." "Good," he said. "I never believed in her anyway." She laughed. Full and real, the kind she had almost forgotten she knew how to do. Outside, in May, in her mother's garden, the roses were coming in.